You were talking earlier about how this is kind of the second wave of what you saw.
Yeah.
And you saw the first wave of like what, early to mid 2000s?
Yeah,
And then the
that
second
was
wave
hard.
of kind of '08.
Nuclear winter, that was.
I saw kind of a first wave at the end of the 90s, but that's another story. But
And I was there too.
What do you, oh, you were, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you notice about the two different waves? Like yeah.
Okay, so I think the first wave, this is very common knowledge, right? Everyone, it was a lot of ridiculous valuations and businesses were being built on the back of nothing. There was really no business there, a business model.
What year, roughly?
Sort of 99 to 2001. Like it all tanked late 2000, didn't it?
Yeah.
Early 2001.
Early 2001 was the NASDAQ crash.
It was all tanking at that point. And I think it's because there was no real proper viable businesses, right? That was the boo.com time.
I remember seeing like 6 pitches for like dentist.com,
yeah,
dentistthis.com,
pets.com was around.
All the different pet conglomerations.
And people weren't really thinking of the business. They were like, let's have big parties. And, I was part of it. I was having a great time. And I was going to those networking things First Tuesday. And I was working back then in the PwC incubator. And even PwC was financing startups.
Really?
They were like putting money into 4 or 5 startups. And back then I was a super junior consultant and I was like, looking at the business plans for companies and doing the due diligence on them and putting and then that tanked once IBM took over that part of PwC. Now, I think people are much more focused on the bottom line. They've got a proper business, a business model. They're looking at how do we get revenues or, in some cases or a lot of cases, particularly on the West Coast, how do we get the kind of users we need that we can monetize? I think people are smarter business people this time around, and they're looking at the business model. And the ones that don't make it, I think, are because they hadn't really looked at the business model. And actually, we ran a startup outlook survey, which we released beginning of May. And we did it in UK and US. Now, the interesting thing is I forget the numbers because it's been about a month or two since I looked at the survey. But funnily enough, British entrepreneurs had a greater focus on the bottom line. So they were more likely to hit their revenue numbers and targets, and they were likely to be more profitable than the American companies that we surveyed.
I believe that.
Which is
interesting.
Our theory behind that actually was that I think the investors in Europe just tend to focus on that. And this is, again, a theory, hypothesis, and you two can debate about this. But I do think that the investors here really want that focus on the bottom line. So startups tend to be more profitable. There is less money being given to them, so they have no choice but to make money and to think about, making their revenue targets. And 2013 in this survey, they were so positive. They were more positive than the American entrepreneurs because they had hit profitability or revenue generation in 2012 and 2011.
Right, as opposed to back in the days when you would brag about your burn rate. That was how cool you were.
Exactly.
So that's kind of come full circle.
So, I think it's a lot more. I think, for lack of a better word, it's a lot more responsible business management now, than it was back then. And it's been fun living through the resurgence because I was I feel there at the beginning. There's a little potted history, if it's all right, that I can give. So late 2007, Seed Camp launched, and back in the Microsoft days, we were there helping give software to the 5 Seed Camp investee startups. I think Mike started TechCrunch Europe around that time as well. It was late 2007. Mike, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it was around that time, 2008. I got my job for the startup team at Microsoft in January 2008, and I was on board to plan and strategize and do the launch for Bizspark on this side of the pond. And we launched that in November 2008. So that's 2008. People were starting to say, oh, there's really interesting startup-y things. Then you go into 2009, and the first ICE trip happened. And ICE, if you don't know, is sort of this group of entrepreneurs. And to this day, it's just almost a support group of entrepreneurs supporting each other, and people like myself and lawyers and other people, VCs that are part of the ecosystem. And we help each other, we mentor each other, we try to be supportive. So the very first trip was February 2009. And then you start to see other corporate programs launching. So IBM Entrepreneurs launched, I think, in about early 2010, late 2000. I've just got to get all the timing straight. If you going back to 2008, Huddle had just began. Like they were late 2007, had their Series A funding late 2007, early 2008. Companies like Shuttle, Skimlinks, Mind Candy, a lot of these companies
so
that
the
are
second wave.
Yeah, they all launched around 2008. So for me, that's a really special year. And you look at them 5 years later. And then that 2010 things start to gain momentum. More and more corporates are getting into it. Amazon had always been around, with AWS, but around 2010, and again, Amazon, forgive me if I'm wrong, Chris, tell me if I'm wrong. Around then, AWS for startups started to launch, and then you get to 2011, and the beards turned up, right? Right. So you guys were about 2011. What was it? Early, mid 2011?
We met in June or July.
First event
in
mid 2011. Then you get to like November 2011, and that's when the government announces the launch of Tech City.
Okay.
Right? And so all of a sudden the government's got this whole focus. But you go back to 2008, I'm sorry, that's when Moo.com and Songkick and all those guys were already at the Roundabout, and it was already organic. So in my view, 3 years later, the government came on board and said, wow, there's something special here. Let's launch the announcement for Tech City. So that's late 2011. You get to 2012, and oh my God, everything's happening, right? So Google announces entrepreneurs, like Google for Entrepreneurs, and Campus opens around March last year. Yeah, March. Silicon Valley Bank finally gets their British banking license in June.
A year ago, June.
A year.
Last year,
yeah. But the thing is, we'd been at it for 2.5 years, right? It wasn't easy to get a banking license in Great Britain, but we saw there was something in it. So we're going to make the commitment and the investment, and we did it. So, I mean, I'm so impressed by the team that did it. I came on board after, but the team that did it, they built a bank. Like, they built the whole platform and the operation, and they extended it from the US, and they, worked hard to get that license after 2.5 years of working with the FSA, or back then is what it was called. So that launches. And Telefonica announces Wire sort of early 2012. And they launched the Wire Academy around June 2012. And now you look at 2013, and it's just everywhere. There isn't a corporate I'm not speaking to where they're not innovating, and they're getting their guys out learning about startups. Nokia, Microsoft, IBM, AWS, Google, Telefonica. I mean, I could just keep naming corporates that are going, oh my God, these entrepreneurs, there's something in it, right? So if you think about back in the day, and then actually one last thing.
It's a great history lesson.
Yeah, and back in 2008, there's also this very special event that Huddle launched called Drink Tank. And one of the things I first did, I was like, sure, I'll sponsor that, And that was around February time. And that was just hey, we're a bunch of entrepreneurs. We don't know anybody. Oh my God, it's so lonely here. Well, let's meet together once a month. Only CEOs and people like Bindi who have money to put behind the bar because she's a big corporate. That's the only reason they let me in the room is because I was sponsoring.
Credit card.
I'm being really open here. But what a great way for me to meet great CEOs. And to this day, some of those CEOs are my very, very dear friends because we kind of all grew up together, right? I grew up and I grew the program. The CEOs said great things about me and the stuff I was doing with them, so I wouldn't be where I am without their support. And then I see some of these guys now, and they're going to be our next big exits. And I feel like a really proud friend to see some of these folks and how they've grown.
So really interesting about London community, I find, is there's a lot of camaraderie.
Entrepreneurs for government, they're really hacking the system.
Could be a little like that. And you're talking about like free flow of ideas.